Thank you again for the invitation. Thank you to Pastor Mark. Thank you to St. John's for the invitation to be here this morning. I was told a moment ago that this is the first time we're doing one of these after worship forums in umpteen years. So I will make all the mistakes, and then the next folks after me will be taught by my mistakes. I am Oby Ballinger. I have served for 15 years as a pastor in the United Church of Christ, and most recently served for 8.5 years at what is now Morningside Hills United Church of Christ, just on the other side of France Avenue, serving in the Morningside neighborhood. So I've also along the way, in the course of my service and ministry, I've also been formed and shaped in the work of community organizing. And so that has been something I've done on the side and occasionally in paid roles, organizing for LGBTQ equality, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender equality. And so was part of the work to make marriage equality real in Connecticut when I was there in seminary at Yale Divinity School. And then here in Minnesota in 2011, 2012, you might remember the Minnesotans United for All Families campaign. If you were here, working to stop a ban on marriage equality in the state constitution, which we did in 2012, and then put it in made it law here in 2013. So that work has been part and parcel of my passion, and also went to work with Isaiah, which is another multi-faith, multiracial coalition working on other areas of racial, climate, social, and economic justice here in Minnesota. When I reached we reached the end of the political conversation last year and saw how members of the LGBTQ community, my community, which I'm a gay man, when I saw what was coming down the line and how transgender people in particular, family members, friends, beloveds of mine too, were being targeted for what seems to me to be unnecessary and short-term political gain, I decided that I felt called to step away from parish ministry so that I could focus full-time on helping to organize a multiracial, multi-faith, statewide coalition called Prism. I founded that in January and finished my term at Morningside Hills UCC then. And then Prism has become, over these last weeks and will continue for a great deal longer, I hope, an effort to pull together people of many different faiths and to inspire us and to work together so that Minnesota can continue to be a place that is a haven and a supportive space for members of the LGBTQ community and beyond. There's a lot more that I can say, but I want to be respectful of our time together. And so to give you a quick outline of how I hope the conversation might go, and I really do hope it will be a conversation. These What in the World forums that Pastor Mark has invited me to begin today and will continue over the coming weeks invite us to ask together in a given area or for a given population, what's going well? Where is there pain or challenge and suffering? And what can we as people of faith, what can St. John's do to be part of making things better? So that's the invitation in the course of the coming half hour or so. And I want to invite us to begin with just sort of naming together what are the good things about, in particular around the LGBTQ community. What are the things that you have seen that we celebrate at St. John's as a Reconciling in Christ congregation? What are the things that we can say are going well for God's people who are lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and otherwise? What changes for the good have you seen? Yes, please.
Well, the one that is closest, nearest, and dearest to our hearts is the more recognition within the church large government project, reconciling Christ. We were involved with that in Florida, and we were so pleased to see St. John's do that here. So I
More
think that's a big positive.
Absolutely. More recognition in the church and in society of the need to declare reconciling in Christ, to expand this growing movement. In my denomination, it's called the Open and Affirming Movement, but it's the same. It's taking the efforts as you did in Florida, as St. John's has done here, to think faithfully about how can we most fully and faithfully welcome parts of the rainbow community. Thank you. Others? What's going well? What do you celebrate about where we are right now for LGBTQ identity? I'll say Minnesota in particular currently is a North Star, so to speak, for LGBTQ people throughout the Midwest and really through the whole center of the country. In part because of our transgender protections that were passed in 2023 and 2024. Minnesota is a place that people are literally moving to because our healthcare covers the essential healthcare for trans and gender affirming needs of children, youth, adults. We provide more safe space and community, especially if you're in the middle part of the country. It's probably Illinois and Minnesota, for which people are coming. Prism is fiscally sponsored by Outfront Minnesota, which is the state's leading LGBTQ advocacy organization. And for about the last 2 years, as the anti-transgender rhetoric has really been heating up around the country, people have been moving in to Minnesota. And Outfront gets calls every week from families who are looking to relocate. And there's a whole term for LGBTQ trans refugees finding a safe space in Minnesota. Yes?
I'm a visitor here. I'm a member of a ELCA Lutheran Church in the metro area, and our congregation is not reconciling in Christ. And a hesitation that seems to be always bubbling up is that it will become a polarizing issue or process. So I look to this congregation and you as to how to allay those fears and to pose it in a positive light. And I know that it's a congregation that brings it forward. It's not the clergy. It needs to arise from within the body. But yeah, I would like to hear from this congregation as far as how, did it bring you together, which is what we hope it would do. So I will just yield the floor back to you.
Please on your name.
I'm Deborah Ost.
Deborah Olst. So Deborah has asked if there are folks here who can speak to or testify to the impact that the Reconciling in Christ conversation has had here at St. John's on bringing people together and opening up new ways forward. You'd like to hear, seek out Deborah. You want to add?
Yeah, I was on the committee, the task force, to bring the Reconciling in Christ proposal to the congregation. And what I heard from several people was, aren't we already? Didn't we already do this? And we really, I think it went smoothly, like it was a unanimous vote. And I mean, I think we've welcomed, we include everyone, our council president, our synod president or bishop is gay. It's wonderful.
It's been an affirmation, I'm hearing you say, of what's already happened. There's already God's rainbow kin are part of faith communities and are led by the Spirit, and all we're doing is saying, affirming God's welcome. This might be a conversation to have more in personally, but I benefited from two congregations. I served two congregations that shortly before my arrival went through what we call the open and affirming process. And I saw it unleash new bursts of energy for people saying, oh, we are clarifying who we we are. And I'll just say, as a member of the LGBTQ community, I talk regularly with people who assume that if it's a church, if there's a cross, I'm not welcome. Until that changes, and it may be decades more until that changes, it will be necessary to have the kind of deliberate conversations so that what we know as church insiders of God's embracing love for everyone is also visible and known beyond. I appreciate the way that the Reconciling Christ logo is on the church sign, is on the bulletin. It's visible under your visitor's log. There's a rainbow there. It's very clear when you enter in that this is a Reconciling Christ community, and that feels like it's important to celebrate and recognize. Thank you for the question. What are the things, where are the places where we're experiencing hardship or challenge, pinch points as it comes to LGBTQ people? We've named some of them, but just sort of speak aloud to what in the world is challenging for LGBTQ people, allies, right now.
I would say unfounded hatred.
Unfounded hatred, John says, yes.
Do they have a church they go to whatever religion they are themselves?
Say that again.
Do they have their own church they go to whatever religion they are?
People finding a church that they can go to, or a religion, their faith institution. Do people have a place that they can go that's accessible, that's nearby, that's done the work to prepare to be welcoming? That's more true here in Minneapolis, but part of the work of Prism has been, I'll share a little bit more about that, but to connect people to welcoming faith communities in their local congregations, or in their local communities that they didn't know about, didn't have. Other challenges that we're seeing.
Unfounded fear.
Unfounded fear. If there's unfounded hatred, there's also unfounded fear. And often a fear that comes from misinformation or disinformation or other challenges that we're afraid of the things we don't know about. Again and again, it's been our experience that when LGBTQ people come out, we become less scary because, oh, I know Oby, I know Rick, I know XYZ. We're not as scary when we're, I will say there continue to be legislative challenges, and over the last 3 to 5 years, anti-trans legislation in particular in the states throughout the country and here in Minnesota have been attempted and have seen more and more progress. Where last week, 2 weeks ago, in the state of Iowa, for the first time ever in U.S. history that I know of, human rights have been removed or reduced in human rights provisions in the state of Iowa as transgender people's human rights were removed. One of my pastor colleagues and friends is a trans person who serves there, and named for us our clergy cohort, named for us some of the daunting challenges, and that they are looking at maybe having to leave. And we're saying, come to Minnesota, but we shouldn't have to move because the state laws are changing against you. In Minnesota, we have seen our state legislature, particularly the House, over the last 2-3 weeks, has explored in committee and then brought to the floor a bill that would ban participation of trans youth in any youth sports, and would also ban transgender inmates from being housed with the appropriate gender, so that trans women would be forced to go to a men's prison instead of being able to be where they're the safest and where they're the most comfortable. So those bills have not have not passed in the House or the Senate, but it's a reminder that this is still a conversation we're having in Minnesota as well. Yeah.
How are they working with the schools? Some schools are, how's it bad food, some like it.
Absolutely. The question is, how are folks working to support LGBTQ people in schools? And that's a very dynamic place where some schools and some school districts are very much on the side of protection and resource connection, And other schools are rolling back, are saying, the Lakeville School District in particular recently took votes and removed posters and descriptions of welcome to those who are non-white and those who are non-straight. So diversity, equity, and inclusion posters are being pulled off, which, I mean, a poster is a poster. A poster doesn't make or break. And yet, the act of having public discussion about who is welcome and who is not, and taking a public vote to remove statements of welcome is a statement of exclusion. Other things that you recognize are challenges. Go ahead, David.
I think along the lines of the whole trans discussion right now is that, of course, it's in the forefront. It's right out there, but this has been a struggle for years. It's just being sought after now by ultra-conservative people who don't understand it, don't like it, keep it away from me so I don't want anybody else to know about it. That's why it's in the forefront right now. So fear. You gotta fear this. We have to change laws. It's the saddest thing I've ever seen. What are you so scared of? What are you so afraid of? I don't understand that.
Yeah, faith says we live by faith and not by fear, and we need not fear, and yet fear is being really leaned in. Fear, particularly about fictitious scenarios that heighten people's anxiety or concern, particularly around trans people, because trans people are the smallest part of the Rainbow Coalition, and it's more easy for political gain to target and to separate off support. I'm okay with the gay and lesbian people, but those trans people, let's be afraid that there's a political thing. And it's this decade's version of what was done in 2000s and in 2010s, where fear of gay people being able to have marriage was used for political gain. We saw that, we lived that. And on the other side of that, we see, oh, that was kind of a nothing burger. It's only good to expand and welcome more people into the practices and structure and responsibilities of marriage. These are enough of the different ways that we need to be more active and kind of lift up the calling of our faith as a Reconciling Christ congregation to take a stand, to have an impact. And so the next little thing I'll turn to here, and I appreciate the conversation because I hope that we'll have a little bit more of the back and forth conversation here, is how can people at St. John's make a difference? What do we do to expand what's going well and to repair and amend and reverse that which is sliding backwards? So I wouldn't be a community organizer if I didn't have a clipboard. So I'm going to pass this around. I'm going to start it now as we continue the conversation, because I want to make sure you get a chance. If you'd like to learn more about Prism, which is this multi-faith, multiracial network statewide working for policy change at school boards, at city and county, and in the state legislature. Add some information here. I can be in touch with you. My card is also in the back here, so if you'd like to take a card and be in touch with me, just pull one of those off. Thank you. There's more sign-up sheets if we fill it all up. So when I started thinking about and hearing and how I might respond to the call to bring what is fairly unique, pastor who has a lot of community organizing training and experience. What can I do for God's work, the church in the world beyond a parish? The last thing I wanted to do was start another organization. You know, in Minneapolis, and you hear about, the last thing we need is another LGBTQ organization. I really didn't feel like, and thankfully I've not had to start a 501c3 separate organization, because I feel like the work that's needed is to continue building a multiracial and multi-faith and statewide network. That should already exist, right? We should already have things like that. And we do to some extent. And so what I'm doing is essentially adding some capacity to that statewide organization I mentioned earlier called Outfront Minnesota. How many of you have heard of Outfront Minnesota? Outfront has been around for around 40 years, and it's the leading statewide organization for LGBTQ things. They do about 4 different things. Direct service to folks who are in the LGBTQ community. There's education, there's polity, and then there's organizing. And my friends and colleagues at Outfront Minnesota have said, of those 4 mandates, the one that we're least well equipped right now to do is the organizing work. And I said, well, that works out well because I feel most called to and equipped for community organizing. And I want to do that with 15 years of pastoring and faith connections in community. And because I believe that people of faith especially need to be at the forefront of advocacy for our LGBTQ neighbors and siblings. It's voices of faith that for decades, even centuries, have been used to say, oh, you're not welcome, God doesn't like you, God hates you. And so we, as people of faith, have a special responsibility and an opening, I believe, to tell a different story. So I had a conversation with Outfront to say, would you just conjure up $75,000 and just add me to your staff, please? That wasn't going to happen. It's part of the long-term plan, but they were not ready to hire another staff member, but they said, we will support you in this work. We will support the work of Prism and partner with you. And so they've agreed to be a fiscal sponsor, which means that people can make a donation to Outfront Minnesota and earmark it for Prism. And Outfront will hold that in a dedicated bank account that can be used to cover the costs of organizing. So Prism is focused pretty specifically on people of faith and is focused on statewide organizing because we don't need another, more efforts right in Minneapolis, I would say, for LGBTQ advocacy. We do need a great deal of work to support trans youth and their families, queer youth and their families, their schoolmates, throughout greater Minnesota. And I have found that there is a hunger and a yearning beyond Minneapolis and St. Paul for how we can be together and recognize our belonging to one another. This last Wednesday, I was at a meeting convened by Community of Christ in Apple Valley. And it was a Wednesday night, if you remember, that was the snowstorm. I played hooky from Ash Wednesday service to be there, and there were still 10 people who gathered at this person's home. And they were folks from nearby congregations, but they didn't know the other person, the other community was there. People around the table, there was a trans couple that was living in Farmington, Minnesota, who drove here. Their member drove to Apple Valley. And they didn't realize that they didn't have to go all the way into Minneapolis in order to be around safe space, in order to be with others where they could be people of faith and be trans-identified, have a family, and care for all the things that they care for. There was another person I was on the phone with that afternoon talking about this. She happened to live in Apple Valley. She's a lesbian, African-American preacher leader in the community in Minneapolis, but she told me, I live in Apple Valley. I live 2 miles from that Community of Christ congregation. I had no idea they were there and that they were LGBTQ affirming. Part of the work of Prism, I'm discovering, at least right now, is to help weave connections in congregations and communities in the 4 corners around the Twin Cities that are not as close in. They might be a half hour out of Minneapolis to St. Paul. They're not rural, and yet there's an assumption of LGBTQ people in particular that we're alone out here. That trans couple in Farmington said, I used to be able to put a rainbow flag out. I don't feel safe doing that anymore. They've been chased out of bathrooms. They feel unwelcome on their own block. And one of them said, we were here before anyone else moved in. And yet I can't put up a rainbow flag anymore, and my Black Lives Matter sign has been taken more times than I can count. But the work of Prism is to help that family and others in Apple Valley, in Egan, in Savage, Northfield, to know of one another so that they can respond and support and connect each other in the schools, in the state, conversations with state legislators, at city councils, and particularly making sure people of faith are connected and are in the conversation. There are 8 priority areas and districts around that I've identified that are more purple if you use the political coloring system. They're not deep red, they're not deep blue, but they're purple all around the metro. Also northeast Minnesota, southeast Minnesota, the St. Cloud area, and Moorhead. These are all places where there are more LGBTQ people and faith institutions, but they're not like the deep blue places of Minneapolis and St. Paul, and people assume I'm alone out here. If Prism does nothing more than to knit together and introduce neighbor to neighbor so that queer youth and adults feel protected and like they have a place of belonging, that by itself is the good work of the Spirit, and that by itself is the beginning of helping to make sure Minnesota is a place where people are welcome no matter where they live, what kind of family they're a part of, and how they identify. So that's the calling that I'm invited into for Prism.